Hi everyone, good morning. I am here for number 5 of my I Survive, the sinking of the Titanic read aloud. My dog Roy is a little tired. I don't know if you can see him. He's very pooped. I think he slept soundly last night, but it's early for him. So I just wanted to recap. So we're going to be reading 9 and 10 today, chapters 9 and 10. So where we left off, George had quite an evening. He had snuck down to the first class baggage hold in search of a mummy. Instead of a mummy, he encountered a thief who stole one of George's prized possessions, a Bowie knife that he always carried with him. And George was very afraid that this thief was going to do something to him or steal the key to his cabin and somehow get in with Phoebe and Aunt Daisy, and George was very afraid. And then suddenly the ship seemed to shake and they were knocked down, and George was so happy because he was able to escape from the thief, and he ran back up to the safety of his suite in first class, and he was feeling really good. But then he realized something wasn't right because the engines of the Titanic had gone quiet, and when he went to investigate out on the deck, he saw that people were laughing and playing and that the decks were covered with snow and ice, and he heard that the ship had struck an iceberg. But everyone said, don't worry about that. Everything's fine. Of course, the Titanic is unsinkable. We don't have to worry about anything. So George felt better. He went back into his cabin. He snuggled up, and but he still had a little bit of feeling of unease. Why weren't those engines starting up again? So that's where we left off. And here we go with chapter 9. So he'd heard a knock on the door at the end of chapter 8. It was Henry. Hello, George, said Henry. Can I speak to Mrs. Key, please? Henry wore his usual polite smile, but his voice wasn't jolly. What is it? Said Aunt Daisy, stepping out of her room. So sorry to barge in like this, ma'am, Henry said, but there's been an incident. Aunt Daisy glared at George. I'm so sorry, Henry, she said in an exasperated voice. My nephew here just can't seem to stay out of trouble. Oh, no, ma'am, Henry exclaimed. This has nothing to do with George. It's the ship, ma'am. Seems we've bumped an iceberg. I'm sure the captain is just being cautious, but he wants everyone up on deck. It's after midnight, Aunt Daisy said with a laugh. Surely the captain doesn't expect us to appear on deck in our night clothes. No, ma'am, it's very cold outside. Henry walked over to the dresser and brought out 3 life jackets. And you'll need to put these on too, over your coats. Aunt Daisy stared at the life jackets as if Henry were holding up clown costumes. Henry, I'm not taking the children out into the cold for some kind of drill. Has Captain Smith lost his senses? Of course not, Mrs. Key, Henry said. Now, if you could just get yourself and the children ready, I'll be back in just a moment to see if you need any help. He left them alone. All right, George, Aunt Daisy said. I guess we'll have another adventure to boast about when we get back. You get dressed, I'll get Phoebe up. Aunt Daisy went to Phoebe's bed, pulling aside the curtains. George heard a gasp and he rushed over. Phoebe wasn't there. Where could she be? Aunt Daisy exclaimed. A cold feeling crept up George's spine. Phoebe, his guardian angel. She must have woken up while George was gone, and now she was somewhere on the ship, searching for George. He took a deep breath. I went out exploring, George said, after you went to bed. I didn't think Phoebe would wake up. She never does. So she's out there looking for you, Aunt Daisy said. George nodded. She doesn't want me getting into trouble. He kept his eyes glued to the floor. Aunt Daisy should be furious with him, and Papa was right. George had no sense, not one lick of sense. How could they ever find Phoebe? But then George had an idea. That lemon drop he'd found in the hallway, could it be? He ran out into the corridor, which was still empty. It seemed Henry wasn't having much luck getting people out of bed and up onto the deck. George ran a little ways down the hall. There! He hurried down a little farther. Yes, another lemon drop. Phoebe, his smart sister. Aunt Daisy came up behind him. She's left a trail of lemon drops, George said. Aunt Daisy looked confused. Like Hansel and Gretel, George explained. She left a trail so she could find her way back. So now we're in chapter 10. George and Aunt Daisy scrambled to get dressed and put on their life jackets. Aunt Daisy brought Phoebe's warmest coat, and George carried the extra life jacket. They'd quickly find Phoebe and head up to the boat deck, and tomorrow morning this would be a big joke to laugh at over breakfast. George thought that Phoebe had gone to the promenade deck. That's where that she'd woken up by the commotion. That she'd been woken up by the commotion with the ice, and figured that George had gone out to see what was happening. But when they got to the main staircase, they saw that the yellow glints were headed downstairs, not up to the deck. George's heart sank. Phoebe had headed down to the first-class baggage hold because she had to have known that George would want to see that mummy. Of course she'd known. Phoebe could read his mind. Chill went through George's bones. What if the scar-faced man was lurking in the baggage hold when Phoebe got there? He ran faster down the stairs now. Aunt Daisy called after him, but he didn't slow down. But when he got to G deck, there was a gate stretched across the doorway. This wasn't here when I came down, he said to Aunt Daisy. He tried to pull it open, but it was locked, and just on the other side there was a mob of people standing restlessly, third-class passengers, from the looks of their worn clothing. And here's a picture that the illustrator Scott Dawson drew, so you can get a sense of what they saw. Look, Aunt Daisy said, pointing at one of Phoebe's candies glinting on the floor on the other side of the gate, pushed next to the wall. She's down here. Pardon me, she called to the steward standing in front of the crowd. You've gone the wrong way, madam, he said, staring at Aunt Daisy's huge diamond ring. The captain wants first-class passengers up on the boat deck now. My niece is down here somewhere, Aunt Daisy said. You need to let us through. I'm sure she wouldn't have wandered down this far, the steward said. We're quite sure she's down here, Aunt Daisy said, so if you'll open the gate. I'm sorry, madam. Regulations. Open this gate at once, Aunt Daisy shouted in a tone George had never heard her use before. The man took a key from his pocket and opened the gate. He stepped aside to let them pass. The crowd surged forward. Get back, the steward shouted. We'll tell you when it's time for you to go up. A few of the men lunged toward him. Aunt Daisy grabbed George's arm. The steward took a pistol from his pocket. His hand shook as he waved it toward the crowd. George and Aunt Daisy stepped through the gate. The steward slammed it behind them. They were trapped down there, just like everyone else. George and Aunt Daisy squeezed through the crowd, weaving around trunks and stepping over sleeping children. There were so many people. If Phoebe's candies were down here, they couldn't see them anymore. Suddenly, something crashed from George from behind, a pair of arms around his waist so tight he couldn't breathe. George's heart stopped. The scar-faced man. Giorgio! Enzo screamed up at him. George's eardrums nearly split in two. Enzo's dad hurried over to them. He tried to gently peel the little boy away from George, but he would not let go. No, he howled, no! Very sorry, Marco said, smiling apologetically at Aunt Daisy, who looked more confused than ever. We're old friends of Giorgio. George started to introduce Aunt Daisy, but before he could get 3 words out, Enzo was dragging him down the hall, elbowing his way through the crowd like a pint-sized bull. See, Enzo said. What? George said. No, see. What was this kid doing? What did he want George to see? The answer was just a few steps away through an open door. It was the mail sorting room, except now all George could see was water. Green water swirling halfway up the stairs, foaming and churning like a stormy river. Sacks of mail bobbed up and down. Hundreds of letters floated on the surface. And now George understood what Enzo was saying. Sea. The sea. The Titanic was filling up with water from the sea. So that is the end of chapter 10, and tomorrow we will pick up with chapter 11. I'm also going to start doing little videos to give you some little glimpses into the Titanic from my research. So look out for those because as I've told you earlier, there's so many fascinating things about this ship and the sinking of the Titanic, and I'm really eager to share them with you. So have a great day and stay in touch, and I will see you tomorrow morning. Bye-bye.